Keep listening for This Just In from Outdoors, environmental news from the Monterey Bay, only on KZSC, Santa Cruz. KZSC.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? The forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
You're listening to This Just In from Outdoors. Thanks. Stay tuned for news about the closure of the recreational fishery for red abalone in California, and journalist Dan Rather's speech to earth scientists celebrating the importance of science to American democracy and human survival. Plus headlines and more. Stick around.
This Just In from Outdoors.
A small blaze in Ventura County, first reported on Monday, December 4th, quickly went out of control as it spread across more than 272,000 acres and 2 counties as of Friday morning. The blaze has burned an area nearly as large as the city of Los Angeles, and over its course has threatened 5 cities. More than 1,000 homes and businesses have been destroyed. The Thomas Fire was 65% contained by Friday morning. CAL FIRE Deputy Chief Scott McLean told the San Francisco Chronicle, quote, "This just shows us that there is no fire season anymore. It's December. We have fires all year round now," unquote.
Last year, California experienced record-high rains, which helped to fill up many of the reservoirs after California had been experiencing a year-long drought. Unfortunately, the Bay Area, including Santa Cruz, is currently experiencing one of the driest Decembers in years. There is an existing ridge of high atmospheric pressure that is blocking storms and rainfall from the west coast. It's likely that there will be no rainfall within the next 2 weeks. People should expect to experience moderately high temperatures in the 60s during the day and chilly night. Due to the poor air quality in the San Lorenzo Valley, a Spare the Air alert was issued on Monday, December 11 and expected to last until Friday, December 15. Although we have been experiencing one of the driest Decembers thus far, some key areas and watersheds in Northern California, such as Shasta and Folsom, have been experiencing normal rainfall during this season, but high atmospheric pressure is beginning to block storms there as well.
2 new lawsuits have been filed in federal court to stop the Trump administration from deep-sixing rules meant to reduce pollution, fight climate change, and preserve public resources. A dozen conservation groups and the state attorneys general of California and New Mexico filed suit on Tuesday to reinstate the methane waste rule, which would force oil and gas companies to install equipment to capture excess methane gas at their wells instead of venting it or burning it off. The BLM suspended the rule until January 2019, arguing that it is too big a burden on industry. Jim Murphy with the National Wildlife Federation says Colorado already has similar requirements and the companies have complied without a problem.
These measures in some ways pay for themselves because the industry actually, by putting in sensible measures, they capture more of the methane, and the methane is fuel that they can then sell. It will certainly increase royalties for taxpayers.
This rule has survived several attempts to thwart it. First, Congress rejected an attempt to roll it back using the Congressional Review Act. Then the BLM tried to suspend it administratively but was stopped in court. Now, clean air advocates are hoping the judge will grant an injunction, forcing the companies to comply starting this January. Murphy says methane gas is a super pollutant that has 87 times the warming effect of carbon dioxide over the short term, which harms human health and the environment.
And it's fueling climate change, which is causing sea level rise, it's causing habitat degradation, it's causing trout streams to warm. Climate change right now is one of the biggest threats to wildlife.
The Department of the Interior reports that in 2014, oil and gas companies wasted enough gas to supply 1.5 million households for a year.
The holidays can be a time of abundance, with lots of food, gift-giving, and fun. Unfortunately, they're also a time of abundant carbon pollution.
The carbon footprint of the holidays is really huge.
Nikki Fotheringham, editor of the blog Green Moxie, says one of the main sources of holiday carbon emissions is transportation. Everything from flights and long drives to see friends and family, to trips to the mall, grocery store, and post office. Not only are people traveling, but so are all the things they purchase, whether at a store or online.
If you buy something that was made in China, the travel footprint of that gift is huge.
That's on top of the carbon pollution produced by manufacturing all those goods. Fotheringham says there are many ways to reduce your environmental impact during the holidays. For one thing, she suggests carpooling to celebrations or using public transit if possible. She also likes to make her own gifts, to use local ingredients in her holiday meals, and to decorate with recycled materials.
Every single little bit helps. Just a few small changes here and there mean that your holiday celebrations don't have to actually negatively affect Mother Nature.
Climate Connections is produced by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication. Learn more at yaleclimateconnections.org.
The federal government is harming endangered species by disregarding the science when making decisions, according to a new report. The study is called Suppressed: How Politics Drowned Out Science for 10 Endangered Species, and it cites as its first example a decision in June by the Trump administration to withdraw a rule proposed by state and regional authorities to protect the Pacific leatherback turtle from drift gill nets used to catch swordfish. Derek Goldman is with the Endangered Species Coalition, which sponsored the report.
In spite of the Endangered Species Act requiring the best available science to be used in decision-making, that's not always the case. There's pressure from politically powerful special interests who often unduly influence the decision-making process that undermines science as well as wildlife conservation.
There are only an estimated 2,300 western leatherback turtles left in the world. Other threats include ingestion of trash and illegal harvesting of eggs. The report also highlights the threat from Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to rewrite the conservation plans for the greater sage grouse, a small bird that ranges from California to Montana. Goldman says the plans were a grand compromise, years in the making, intended to keep the sage grouse off the endangered species list.
In the case of sage grouse, it's really pressure from the oil and gas industry. They don't like the habitat conservation measures to protect sage grouse breeding areas, known as leks.
The study also highlights the case of an endangered plant in the San Jacinto area of Southern California, which is threatened by development, and it chides U.S. Fish and Wildlife for failing to list as endangered the Hermes copper butterfly, native to the San Diego area.
Greek yogurt is popular these days because it's both delicious and full of protein, but producing it creates large amounts of food waste. Now researchers report in the journal Joule that they've developed microbial bioreactors that turn this waste into bio-oil to feed livestock or even convert it into jet fuel.
My job is to try to make something useful out of waste and recover everything.
That's University of Tübingen applied microbiologist Lars Angenent. He says making Greek yogurt creates a byproduct called acid whey, which contains lots of lactose milk sugar.
You really don't want that in the yogurt, and this is the sugar that we converted to lactic acid, and then from lactic acid into these bio-oils.
Angenent says the next step is to scale the process up for commercialization.
The California Department of Fish and Wildlife Managers have recommended a shutdown of the recreational abalone season for 2018. This decision comes in regards to the crashing populations of the abalone, but ultimately it will be up to the Fish and Game Commission to make the final decision on Thursday at a meeting in San Diego that is open to public comment. A core group of 6 diver scientists systematically patrolled the seafloor at 10 sites along the California coast in CDFW's largest survey. What they discovered was that 37% of all abalone recorded were dead, their shells empty or filled with decaying flesh littering the seafloor, according to Laura Rogers-Bennett, a senior scientist with the Fish and Wildlife. This year's low numbers should trigger a fishery shutdown according to the management plan approved by the Fish and Game Commission in 2005, but a request by the Commission for plans of action that don't include closing the fishery suggests they may not abide by the management plan.
This Just In From Outdoors was in New Orleans, Louisiana last week, covering the American Geophysical Union's fall meeting. One thing that's remarkable about the conference, which features 20,000 scientists and 21,000 presentations, is the taken for grantedness of the serious threat of climate change to the future of humanity on this planet. Journalist Dan Rather echoed this consensus at the meeting as he spoke to a large gathering. Rather was invited to give the talk by AGU President Eric Davidson, who here introduces the longtime anchor of the CBS Evening News. At 83 years old, Rather has come out of retirement to champion the epic story of science and its contributions to the greatness of the United States and to the future of humanity.
Best known for his 24 years tenure as anchor of CBS Evening News, Dan Rather's career has spanned more than 6 decades and earned his place as one of the world's best-known journalists. He is the winner of 33 News and Documentary Emmy Awards, 7 Peabody Awards for his journalism work, and the 2012 Edward R. Murrow Award for Lifetime Achievement. Born in Texas in 1931, Dan Rather began his journalism career with CBS in '61. In '81, he succeeded Walter Cronkite and assumed the position of anchor and managing editor of CBS Evening News, a post that he held for 24 years, as well as anchoring the news magazine show 60 Minutes. In 2006, Rather debuted his cable network news magazine, Dan Rather Reports, and in 2012, he published a memoir, Rather Outspoken, My Life in the News. Dan Rather then briefly attempted retirement, later saying of that episode, "As long as I have my health, I want to be reporting somewhere." Coming out of retirement, Rather launched his latest venture in 2015, an independent production company, News and Guts, which specializes in high-quality non-fiction content across a range of traditional and digital distribution channels. Last month, he released a new book, What Unites Us? Reflections on Patriotism, with straightforward chapter names like empathy, the environment, science, and public education. He expounds on the qualities and characteristics that he believes make America great, and on what must be done to overcome the formidable challenges it faces. One of my favorite Ratherisms is, the press is a watchdog, not an attack dog, not a lap dog, a watchdog. Now, a watchdog can't be right all the time. He doesn't bark only when he sees or smells something that's dangerous. A good watchdog barks at things that are suspicious. End of quote. Like a good watchdog who has been watching from a journalist's perspective for about 60 years, Dan Rather is barking again. He is keenly interested in how science is being used, or not, to inform policy, how it is presented by the press and perceived by the public, and how this has changed during the last 6 decades. I'm looking forward to learning from his insights. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Dan Rather.
I do want you to know that it's an honor to speak before this impressive gathering today. I am the son of parents of modest formal education and the product of fairly modest schooling myself. But here I stand before all of you who have dedicated your lives to scholarship. And I do wonder what, if any, words of wisdom I might offer, other than perhaps to try to make sense of our current moment in history. I want to speak to you from my head and my heart. Speak to you about the possibility of a new age of reason. I've seen a lot over the course of my lifetime, a result of my age and of my chosen career as a journalist. I've covered maybe too many individual stories to count. Some, like the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the terror attacks of 9/11, are seared in my memory. But increasingly, I'm struck by the broader themes that I have witnessed, the lines and curves that emerge when you plot individual story points along the axis of history. The struggle for civil rights, the digital revolution, a burgeoning environmental movement, and so many more. As these waves of change lap upon us, it's not always clear where we are heading or what will the next tide bring. We need to prepare ourselves for an unpredictable future by sorting out facts from the noise, by challenging our own biases and preconceptions, by celebrating the best and creative instincts of the human mind, and by expanding the knowledge upon which we make decisions. Thankfully, as a species, we have created a marvelous framework to organize our energies towards such worthy goals. It's called science. I believe science represents a pinnacle of human achievement, like art, music, and literature. With science, we have expanded our ability to observe and understand our universe far beyond the limits of the physical sensors provided to us by nature. We have learned to see, hear, and touch the vastness of space, the microscopic tools of life, and the chemistry of our planet. We can eradicate a disease like smallpox and learn to generate our own energy from the sun. It is because of people like you who marry the instinct to dream big with the skill to turn notions into data and data into an expansion of what we know to be true. But now we find ourselves in a moment of reckoning, especially here in the United States, yet there are echoes of it around the globe. Are we going to guide our future by science, reason, and knowledge, or are we going to succumb to superstition, ignorance, and propaganda? The fate of our very planet is at stake, something on which so many of you in this room have been sounding an urgent alarm. Earth is warming. Human activity plays a major role. We can, if we act with speed and purpose, likely mitigate some of the harm, but will we? Can we? And what does our failure to confront climate change say about our ability to handle other crises of the present and the future? In many ways, the story of climate science should be seen as a great triumph. Look at how much we've learned and how quickly we've learned it. Look at how a global and diverse community of researchers has collaborated to put a complex puzzle together. These are the forces that give me optimism. I look out at this audience and see a can-do spirit that hopefully can save us from ourselves. But will the world listen? Here is where I think my experiences as a journalist resonate with what I've come to learn about the scientific enterprise. I believe we journalists and scientists are in many ways kindred spirits. We both try to get as close to the truth as is humanly possible. We both work with imperfect tools and high levels of uncertainty. We both must constantly challenge our own assumptions. And we both must have a rigorous acknowledgement of our errors. Yet, we journalists and scientists are both under siege, beset by accusations of fake news, self-interest, and bias. Much of this comes, and let us mark well, through coordinated attacks from powerful actors who have a vested interest in the truth remaining hidden. Confusion and false equivalence are their weapons. Journalism and science, when practiced to the highest standards, are rooted in nuance and fairness. Those who seek to undermine our purpose play by no such rules. Sadly, the forces arrayed against us are not new. I came of age as a reporter in the 1950s, during the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. Journalists were under attack, as were many scientists and others from lines of work that championed reason. We learned that America, like other nations, can be swept by a wave of irrationality, and the dangers of this undertow lurk ever underfoot. With that in mind, the question comes, of course, are we doomed to despair? Thankfully, I'm convinced the answer is an emphatic no. Let us fight the dark pull of cynicism. Skeptics make good scientists and good journalists. Cynics do not. I think it would be a mistake to be too pessimistic about how readily and eagerly the public could embrace science. Science touches on some of the most fundamental human qualities: exploration, curiosity, wonder, and awe. Look at the millions from all walks of life who don special glasses and look to the skies during the recent solar eclipse. It turns out that a majority of the most popular museums in the United States are dedicated to science and space. Walk their galleries and you will see people of all ages from around the globe engaging with the exhibits. Meanwhile, the public waits eagerly for new medical advances and readily adopts new technologies. The human mind is wired to be interested in science. But somehow, much of the story of science is being lost in popular culture. And I believe this breeds much of the dangerous distrust that we are witnessing and experiencing today. It has been a crisis that has been brewing for years. It's exacerbated by growing cynicism towards elites, educated people, including scientists, from a sizable percentage of the public. Now, this is not a phenomenon limited to one political tribe. Yes, we have denial of climate change on the right, but also suspicion of vaccines and GMOs on the left. So how do we start to change this dynamic? I believe it must start with a new approach to engagement and building innovative bridges of understanding. I want to see a revolution in how we communicate science in content, form, and distribution. Often scientists are criticized for not being better communicators or for not taking communication with enough seriousness. And there's always room for improvement, and I do hope the science community embraces the importance of communication with more urgency. But I'm going to let you off the hook a bit. Your job is to be great researchers, to understand data, to dream up ingenious experiments. That is what you are trained to do. My job, those of us in the business, in the craft of communication, our job is to be storytellers, to shape narratives so that they are compelling but also truthful. When it comes to science, we can be doing this a whole lot better. For instance, what if we thought about science communication, well, more scientifically? What if we were not afraid to confront our biases about what the public might find interesting if presented well? And perhaps more importantly, what if we created a new paradigm for the creation of science content? Now, we've seen the benefits of a multidisciplinary approach to scientific research. Why not for science communication? Imagine a world where the best scientists and the best storytellers work together in ongoing collaborations. Not where the scientists are brought on at the end of a project and sort of hung up like Christmas tree ornaments to make sure statements are factually accurate. No, we need to make sure the spirit of science is presented accurately. Imagine if some of the most creative writers, cinematographers, and distribution specialists were working to tell the stories of science. Just as I believe our brains are wired to accept and appreciate the wonder and awe of science, I think our minds are also ready to respond, nearly always, to stories. Tell me a story is one of the most often used phrases in any language and has been for many centuries. Well, bringing these two elements, science and stories, together could be extremely powerful. I know too few of us in the press and media have experienced the long, hard process of research, which is the hallmark of science. Those of us in the press and the media, and I do not accept myself from this criticism, we're always looking for easy answers and simple narratives. We're constantly worrying about what makes science relatable instead of what makes it truly compelling. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have been told that you need to explain your research in ways the public would find interesting? That's what I thought. Instead of explaining what you find interesting. To put it bluntly, I think you're getting the wrong advice. We need to let scientists explain what they are passionate about. That's the best approach to storytelling. If we rethink science communication, we can infuse it with a spirit of joy. We can show that great research is taking place around the globe by diverse scientists, many of whom don't have tenure at fancy institutions. We can democratize the pursuit of science, and we can focus on the journey of discovery as well as the results. I really believe with all my being that the public will respond. Let me close by emphasizing that modernity requires science. Modernity absolutely requires science. And improvement of the human condition requires science. Saving the planet requires science. You are doing the hard work. Let us now join in telling the story of science together so that we can embark on a new era of enlightenment and to leap forward with long new decades of discovery to build a new age of reason. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into This Just In From Outdoors. Check out our stories and past shows online at newsfromoutdoors.org. I've been your host, Keith Rosendahl. Our headlines were produced by myself, Jordan Penland, Kimberly Balmoras, and Lydia Jenkins-Sikowski, with Bob Hirschhorn of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and Dr. Anthony Lizarowitz of the Yale Center for Environmental Communications. Dan Rather was recorded at the 2017 meeting of the American Geophysical Union in New Orleans, Louisiana. The piece was edited and produced by Keith Rosendahl. Thanks for listening. We'll be here next Friday at 5:30 p.m. for another edition. Until then, we'll see you outdoors. One more thing. Did you know that Santa Cruz County is home to dozens of online news and views publications, all put out by dedicated local citizens and professional journalists? Needful News makes it one-click convenient to stay current with these local, state, and national news outlets, and also to stay in touch with your elected representatives. You can exercise your mind and your citizenship on the web by typing needful.news into your web browser. KZSC thanks Needful News for their support of community radio in Santa Cruz.
Just bees and things and flowers,
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? The forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
This just in from Outdoors.
This is Postulus Maximus of Guar, and you're listening to KZSC Santa Cruz 88.1.